Gathered assignment 6.4.
Direct and indirect effects.
What? These are the direct and indirect effects of a natural disaster. The direct effect is what happens during the disaster that affects people. Like how many houses collapsed, and how many people were killed, and how many people were injured, and how many people were made homeless or whatever. Those are all direct. But that happens during the disaster. Indirect effect is what follows. Like the economy, changes in laws, changes in building standards, tax policy, emotional distress. And a lot of my students don't realize that many natural disasters are deadlier after the fact. More people die afterward than during the natural disaster. You know, you can have like a lot of disease spreading, water on the surface, breaks in the plumbing, stuff like that. That can be a really deadly consequence of a disaster. And it's indirect. It doesn't happen during, it happens after. Next. Someone warm up? Somebody explain subsidence. How?
The gradual sinking or causing of an area of land to sink.
Why does the land sink? Why? No.
Is this a tectonic thing?
Well,
Is it a tectonic thing? Or is it
no. Yeah. No. Go ahead.
It's like water seeping in, like, oh, yeah.
Getting there, kinda. What? Keep going.
Oh, okay, like the water seeps in and kind of like pushes, like erosion.
Sort of erosion, yeah, kinda. So you're gonna have, this is a challenging thing for students to explain, but it's a classic AP test question, so get ready for these details. Everybody knows, I've said this a lot throughout the year, about the speed of water affects what it can move. Remember talking about that?
Yeah.
Fast moving water with the school bus and your mom. And slow moving water with like silt only, sediment only. You have that fact in your brain already as a little detached lump. Here's another little detached lump. There's water in the ground everywhere. Anywhere you are, there's water underneath you. You all realize that? It's called groundwater. Some water moves on the surface and some water moves through the ground. And because it's moving, it's safe to assume that it can carry, you know, really fine silty sediment. But it doesn't move very fast, so it can't carry very much. Where you and I are, we're safe. Because basically the water is moving through stuff, but not fast enough to carry it away. However, we sometimes build at the mouth of a river. Anybody been to Venice, Italy? New Orleans, Louisiana? Is Amsterdam on a river mouth? It's along the river, right?
Copenhagen.
Everybody in Copenhagen? Anybody name another river mouth city? Because I'm not really that smart. Fine. At the mouth of a river, you've got all this sediment, because you know that water's always moving, so it deposits sediment. You know how sandbars work? Like, outside of some wave action, you get these like bars of sediment all built up. Okay. When you build a city in New Orleans or in Venice, Italy, at the mouth of a river, you're building on top of silty sediment stuff. And that water's always moving. Because the river flows through the ground and goes out to the ocean. So whenever you get a surge of water coming out of the river, there's a surge of sediment being swept away from under you. I have a perfect metaphor for how subsidence works. Think back to a time when you sat with your feet when you stood with your feet in the ocean, and after a few waves, you start to sink into the ground a little bit. How many of you have experienced that? That's subsidence. Because that water motion, under your weight, that water motion is carrying away little bits of sand from underneath your feet, and you start to sink in. This is why New Orleans and Venice are screwed. Because there's water moving underneath them, carrying away literally the silt that they're built on. We just picked a bad place to put cities. That was not smart. Didn't know it. Okay. Study goals last call? Vocab last call? Number 54, I got to talk about Hurricane Katrina. A, because I remember that disaster. B, because it makes me really sad because I'm like a big fan of New Orleans. I really, 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 really like that city. How many of you remember the Hurricane Katrina event? My hunch is you were like 5 or 6, so you probably learned about it after the fact. Is that correct? This is one of those things that reminds me how old I am. Because every year I've talked about that with my students. And, 10 years ago, I was like, y'all remember how last summer there was that one hurricane? And now it's like, y'all remember when you were 5? And you're all the same lovely little teenagers with potential and intelligence and good looks. And I'm just like getting older and fatter and hairier. The job really highlights my mortality. I don't think other jobs do that, right? The repetitive nature of the content. What's that? Oh, bro, my life is an existential crisis. I'm honestly these are well-traveled pathways. These are old-time shoes, bro. All right. I'm not sure how much you all understand about Hurricane Katrina, or how much you know about New Orleans, but this is a famous case study. And you need to know the reasons why it was so bad. This was pretty much the worst disaster, the worst natural disaster in the history of the U.S., I believe. And it was in many ways preventable and in many ways made worse by a lack of planning and foresight. So we should learn from it. The single most important thing is that we removed natural barriers to flooding. That coastline gets hurricanes 10 or 20 times a year. And in many parts of that coastline, they're not a big whoop. But New Orleans made things worse for itself by removing coastal mangroves and dredging sandbars. How many of you surf, just out of curiosity, or have surfed? Okay. So, because a few of you surf, you understand that sandbars, when there's a wave outside, it'll kick up on that first sandbar, and it might reform. And you'll experience this if you go to a place with many sandbars. You see the big wave outside, and then it makes whitewash, and it'll make a smaller wave, and then whitewash, and then maybe you get some little ripples. By the time you're at the shore, you don't get much. Everybody understand that concept, even if you don't surf? Sandbars are like this underground, so the wind comes in and goes, right? New Orleans is in a river mouth. That river mouth is an access point for international shipping on one of the biggest rivers in the world, the Mississippi River. So in order to protect that river entry, they dredge very heavily. You know what dredging is? Like in the harbor, you suck out sand off the bottom to make it deeper.
That's just helpful to make the ports more accessible.
Right. Precisely. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. The flip side of that is you've also taken the speed bumps out for the incoming storm surge. So instead of that storm surge sort of blowing all of its momentum 2 miles from shore, it'll come full barrel right at your coastline. Also, there's a type of vegetation that's really common along the coastlines of the Gulf Coast, cypress and mangrove swamp. There are 2 types of trees that live in shallow water. So, they're like fingers stuck up in the current. So as the water hits that current, as the current hits that, hits those trees, a lot of its surge energy is taken away by those little fingers of vegetation. Does that make sense to everybody? We got rid of those too. Because we don't like swampiness, mosquito abatement, swamps smell bad. People like to live right up against the beach and see the ocean and go out on the beach, and so they cut down all that vegetation along the coastline. Essentially, New Orleans had natural protections, and they went, nope, we don't need this mangrove, and they said, nope, we don't need these sandbars, ready for the hurricane. And removed its natural barriers to flooding. So if you actually look from the ocean at New Orleans, there's like vegetation and sandbars, and this perfect funnel aimed at downtown New Orleans, where all the water just went, just like shot. It's like a water cannon right in the middle of the city. Number 2, it doesn't help that the city is sinking into the ground, subsidence. Number 3, it doesn't help that the ocean is coming higher, sea level rise. Number 4, it doesn't help that they put that effing city in the dead center of Hurricane Alley. If you map along the Gulf Coast the landfall sites of the last 100 years of hurricanes, New Orleans is pretty much the bullseye. Dead center of Hurricane Alley. And arguably, I hate to get all social justice on you, but it is a predominantly poor black city. And a lot of people argue that the government would have been a little more responsive if Hurricane Katrina happened in Beverly Hills or Manhattan or something. Alright. Anybody want to talk? Oh, by the way, building a city has gotten more expensive. You guys realize that labor and materials used to be cheaper back in the day? People didn't have environmental protection, didn't have a minimum wage. You could just dig stuff out of the ground really cheap. Energy was really cheap. So building the levees and the other blah, blah, blah for New Orleans was pretty affordable, inexpensive. Nowadays, that infrastructure has aged. We can't replace it anymore. We can't afford to take care of our stuff anymore. We built it when it was cheap, now it's hard to keep it. Maybe some of you are experiencing that with your homes, but the price of upkeep has increased. Well, New Orleans is surrounded by fragile, aging infrastructure. So it's almost impossible to keep that city alive. I'm so sad, but it's so new. Yeah.
So it's like a combination of getting rid of the natural barriers and not being able to upkeep the man-made ones. Is that what
With one other thing mixed in there, the climate and regional issues. You're in the dead center of Hurricane Alley at a time when the ocean level is rising and your city's sinking. So like the future just right, exactly. Like there's too many factors. Overcome by events. You ever heard about that? Airplanes can sometimes crash because they're overcome by events. So many little things go wrong that you can't keep up with them all at once and you crash. There's no single reason why they. Have you heard that? Overcome by events? Google it. Yeah, it's a term that's used in aviation. When basically like our rudder got stuck and then our power in engine 3 was lost, and then we had too many people leaning out right to look at the lightning storm, and then the co-pilot was sick, and then we had like a brief wiring glitch in the cockpit. We were overcome by events. They're like little stuff that you can deal with, but it all happens at once. I like that term. That's my life. It's overcome by events. 55 gets 2 stars. And I want to talk about it because it's true that things are getting worse with natural hazards. Basically, climate change, urbanizing, like disasters are for the most part getting worse. And I want to explain why they're getting worse. There's a few exceptions. There's no evidence that volcanoes are getting worse. Earthquakes are not getting worse, but we do live increasingly in cities which are not good for earthquakes, right? Tokyo? Y'all realize if you're in the middle of Kansas and there's an earthquake, it doesn't matter. Even if there was an earthquake under your feet in the middle of Kansas, you're just like out in a big old field somewhere like, whoa, yeah! And you fall over and like hit the grass. But if you have like an earthquake in like Istanbul, where people are all crowded into mud construction, that sucks. So earthquakes are what they've always been. But we increasingly live in high risk urban settlements. Volcanic eruptions, that's one that as far as we can tell is doing what it's always done. They're scary as that. Every now and then there are super volcanoes. Did anybody see that one National Geographic that showed the hot spot underneath the middle of the United States? Apparently, all of the like survivalist crazies were like, wait, there's a super volcano getting ready to go off. I need more guns. And like when that National Geographic thing went off, like people quit their jobs and started like building their like survivalist camps. Tight. Yeah, there's like this huge glob of lava, like right there. And you know, the North American plate is like moving over that glob of lava. So here's the lava, and then here comes the North American plate. And wherever it is, when that thing decides to go, it's going to be like a very big volcano. Like, you know those zits that you can't get out. They're like giant, like under like 2 inches of muscle. They're like, oh, my whole head! Like, that's what we're talking about. And now your little like pops on its own sort of thing. It's like a big old. It's going to be so foul.
When is that supposed to happen?
How would I know that? You think too highly of me. Well, it is one of the reasons that Yellowstone is a hotspot, but it's much bigger than Yellowstone. There's like 4 states. It's like this huge glob.
So what, it would come out in the fourth day, or like
It's gonna shoot out of the ground or what?
How am I supposed to know?
Well, you watched the thing, did it not say anything?
I read the things, but no.
Oh, okay.
I don't know. Nobody knows. Anyway, you know, those big volcanoes happen sometimes. You guys, the big volcanoes, like those mass extinctions, I think 3 of those were big volcanoes. So there's big volcanoes that happen every gajillion years, and then there's little volcanoes all the time doing their thing. More or less, I would say, we're scared of volcanoes. I don't think there's any change in our threat assessment of volcanoes. Yeah. Yeah. Climate change and like atmospheric toxicity. The whole world zombies.
What do you think that's?
Landslides are getting worse, and that is our fault. In response to stuff we do, please look up 3 things. We change the grade, we remove the vegetation, and we add moisture. Does this look familiar to someone? Where we've changed the grade, removed vegetation, and added moisture to create a landslide?
Really? A farming method?
Does anybody live? Yes. Nearby. You know, like the little seashell. There's your little seashell. I don't know if you all know how to read topographical maps. If you were ever a Girl Scout / Boy Scout, you might know how to read that map, but because those lines are really close together, that means it's a very steep hillside. Historically, that hillside used to go all the way out to the ocean, but then they added an artificial coastline out of rocks to build the highway. Highway 101 is entirely man-made land. How many of you knew that? Right. And then they carved back into that hillside. Please look up. Instead of a gradual angle, they carved back so they could squeeze in a little city there. It was a construction camp, I believe. That later on became La Conchita. And there's your governor standing to the chopper. That guy has humongozoid hands. No, he came to Monroe when I was a 4th grader, no, 5th grader. And like, at that time, he was like Conan the Barbarian / like recent Mr. Olympia, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And Monroe Elementary had just installed that like obstacle course behind the blacktop. Anybody go to Monroe? You know what I'm talking about? That's like that with like the obstacle course day. They had like just built that. And I was out there like, okay, cool. And they're like, here comes Arnold Schwarzenegger. And I was like, who's that guy? I was like, holy crap! Like the dude's hands are like that. Like that. They're burly. That dude is a lot of man. No joke. No joke.
Have you seen his
Horrible having governor. Can you imagine the shame of having the Terminator be our state governor globally? And you go outside like a politically educated country, and you're like, yes, we're covered by Conan.
Have you seen his weightlifting video? It's called like Pumping Iron or something.
I have.
It's so gnarly.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
guy's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, amazing accomplishments in this guy's life. Amazing accomplishments. But creepy that he was in charge. So look, anybody see what that is right there? What's that? Students, what's that? That's the problem. See how it just kind of grades downhill a little bit? Well, bedrock underneath, when you add moisture to the topsoil, that topsoil gets muddier and heavier. And then when you add more water in the form of rainfall, all of a sudden, if you've gotten rid of the vegetation and made it steeper, that water accelerates, and because the water's accelerated, it starts to take away stuff, and because the ground is saturated, there's no way for the water to go into the ground, so it goes over the ground, and it moves faster, speeds, carries more stuff. The funny thing is that landslides usually happen from above until the whole thing goes. Entirely preventable. You've got to know the 3 things. Changing the grade, making it steeper. It's totally normal, like, we can dig the dirt. So everybody's like, hey, that dirt, that's not a convenient angle, just get it out of the way. And we got all the machinery and the engineering to like get the dirt out of the way. See, we've never been really good at planning for things that are uncommon. But your generation, you know, you got to get a little smarter about stuff because uncommon weather is becoming more common. Climate change. So because things are changing, the most uncommon things are going to become more common. That's by definition what climate change does. there was a time that we could believe that things would be the same, stay constant. Now we realize things are going to get really freaky. And whatever is least likely is probably getting more likely. So building like this is totally doable. Why not? We can do it. Except, every now and then, the wheels fall off and 10 people die inside their homes, for God's sake. Anybody know people in La Conchita? Anybody have a house in La Conchita? Know people in La Conchita? Remember when it happened? Did anybody see it when it happened? I saw it. I went down to the day that it was like, the roads had just closed. You saw it too? That's like nauseatingly scary, right? How there was just like mud across the freeway. It's like, whoa, you felt so exposed. Like, this is just going to be cool. Scary time. What? No, everything died. Yes?
Isn't there a landslide like every 10 years? Or like this?
What we're referring to is, this was not the first one. There had been another one years before. Followed for reason there will be more. No more landslides? I got a bunch of disasters still.
I heard that one that happened like a few weeks ago on Highway 5.
Oh yeah. A dude. They found a dude surviving in a buried pickup truck like 36 hours after the slide. Yeah. I was doing the. Where was I? I was on the road that weekend.
Same here. It was Highway 5 and I something.
168.
168.
Yeah, top of Antelope Valley. I was on the road that day.
All the trucks had come on the 101 and there was traffic.
I was on the boat, that's right. And my homie pointed out, like, dude, look at, there's like one container truck for every car. And I was like, yeah, man, I'm freaking hate the freeway. He's like, no, this isn't normal. I was like, whatever, man, it's fish. And then we found out later that the reason we saw so many trucks is not just because of lane freeway stuff, but because of the rerouting of traffic. That's right. Now I remember.
There was one time on the side of the road sleeping. And a bunch of them broke down because they got overheated.
Yeah, going over the other side. No, why would you overheat?
I don't know, because there was stuff stuck. I don't know, but I
Oh,
saw
maybe it's going too slow. What? Pro Abilene? Yeah, I don't know. I believe it. Okay, I gotta move on. Students, hurricanes are gonna get a lot worse. There's not more, but they're gonna get worse. They already have been getting worse, and they're gonna keep getting more and worse. How can you predict the severity of a hurricane? What do the satellites look at? No. What? What creates the wind speed? They don't measure wind speed from the satellite. Sort of, which is a function of what temperature? Water relative to air temperature. Hurricane severity is the difference between the water and the air temperature. If the water is super hot and the air is super cold, that's a really high severity hurricane. And when you heat up a planet, where does most of that heat go? The water, right? You understand the high specific heat capacity? You all know that you got hypothermia in 70-degree water, but 70-degree air is really nice? What's the difference? Oh, you can die in less than 12 hours in 70-degree water.
How is that possible?
Is it cold outside or what do you do?
Regardless of air temperature.
Well,
Is it
You can die of hypothermia in the tropics in less than 24 hours. Yes, it does leach your body heat because water holds temperature better than air.
then how do people able to swim?
They're metabolizing a crap ton of energy. They're not free floating. They're warmed up. They're sweating, bro. But they're burning up their fuel by staying in motion. As long as they keep moving at a pretty aggressive pace that most of us can never maintain, yeah. I mean, all I gotta do is run for 36 hours straight, no big deal. That's why it's like a feat of performance. You're not just bobbing in the ocean, you're like burning through a ton of calories to keep your body warm. Like if you surf in the tropics, you know that like if you're gonna be in the water for a while, you pretty much gotta wear a wetsuit anyway. If the water's like 85 degrees, you get too cold. If the sun's not hitting. When I was out at Cloudbridge, it was like super sunny, super sunny, super sunny. And one day it was overcast, and that day that it was all overcast, everybody had to put on wetsuits. Because if the sun's not warming you and you're sitting on a potato chip, you're in water, then you have 82, 83 degrees. That's still colder than the United States, so your heat's just going out all day. All the locals, they were wetsuits. Okay. Because global warming is heating the ocean, hurricanes are becoming more severe. There's not more of them. The rhythm of the number is another weird global cycle that doesn't get changed by climate change. There is no evidence that there will be more hurricanes, but the evidence shows, empirically it's already happened, that more of them will be bad ones. Tsunamis are getting worse, not because there's more tsunamis or because the tsunamis have changed, but because coastal communities removed their barriers. How many of you remember that Indonesia tsunami that they made a movie with Naomi Watts who's a babe? It's called The Impossible, I believe. It's with Ewan McGregor. What's the guy's name?
Yeah.
That guy? So I haven't seen the film, I've seen a couple of the action sequences. But that movie was about a real event. You all remember that 2004, I believe, Christmas Day? I remember where I was. My wife and I were leaving Baja, and we stopped at some like random roadside stand. And we're like sitting waiting for our food, and they're like interrupted the telenovelas to show like live footage of Indonesia and like the big Indonesian tsunami. There have been like 3 big tsunamis in the Indian Ocean in your recent memorable lifetime. The 2004 one, which was on Christmas, we were like 5 years old, you probably wouldn't remember. And then 2 more recent ones, one in the Philippines, and one in the The one in Indonesia, though, hit a tourist community. Anybody remember what that thing is called? Phnom Penh? Is that possible? Does that sound Indonesian? What? Yeah. I mean, get to work. Indonesia tsunami, 2004 or something. The reason that one was so deadly is nobody wants to pay for a vacation when you can't see the sunset. So they get rid of all the mangrove swamps. And then cruise ships like to come really close to like that little bay where all the stuff is. So they had dredged like the channel. Literally 2 miles up the coast and 2 miles down the coast, all the native villages that couldn't afford either of those things, they had flooding but way less mortality. Because when you get rid of your natural barriers, the tsunami can just like power right through to where the people are. You already know why wildfires are worse, right? You ever know why wildfires are worse?
Sumatra.
What?
It hit Sumatra. 2004 tsunami, said it hit Sumatra.
Find me another one. Tsunami in the movie The Impossible. I'm pretty confident it was Indonesia. Is Sumatra Indonesia? Oh, fine. Outsmarted again. Sumatra is Indonesia?
Yeah,
For real, dog?
I'll show you right now.
That's not a separate country? Damn it.
Indonesia.
Fine. I stand humbly corrected. Okay. Everybody knows why wildfire, we left all the fuels. History of fire prevention, built up fuel. You understand that? Wildfires. More wildfires because we left all the fuel. We used to put out fires, so the fuel built up. So we're all living in big old pots of kindling now.
So what if we just let it go for a couple years? Are we already screwed as it is?
I mean, we're screwed either way, but we might be less screwed if we artificially recover patchiness. Remember we talked about that?
So that's the most fixable advent problem.
Maybe, yeah. It's not like it's necessarily easy. but at least that's one that is reversible. Funny thing about tornadoes, the only thing I can tell you about tornadoes is that climate change predicts they'll occur in new places. Nothing, I can't tell you where they would occur because tornadoes are like a complicated fluke of meteorology. But with my own eyes, I saw a tornado in what is now the new Deckers campus on the corner of Los Carneros and Hollister in like 2001 or so, 2002. What? I did. And actually, about 10 years ago, there was a tornado in Hollywood, downtown Hollywood. And there's water spouts that are relatively common on the Butterfly Coast that are historically not common. They haven't been there like in your parents' generation, they weren't common. We just know that tornadoes are popping up in new places. Because they're a fluke of many variables in climate and weather, as weather zones are shifting, those variables will show up in a new place. They don't have the severity of like Tornado Alley, but there are small tornadoes popping up in new places.
There's a water spout right off town.
Yeah. To some degree, they're kind of, it's a wild card, so it can happen anywhere. But the factors are coming together more often in weird places. I got 3 to go, and I only have like 2 minutes, so let me finish. We have an increase in flooding because of this. More and more places are impermeable. Anybody know what impermeable means? Impermeable, like asphalt. More of our cities shed their water. So when you got a bunch of people up the river dumping all their water directly into the river, by the time you live downriver, there's just too much water for the river to hold it. Remember that historically, rainwater used to soak into the ground because vegetation lets it go into the dirt. Everybody see what I mean by that? If you cover the hillside with plastic, you're going to get more water flowing at the bottom of the hillside. Imagine that at the watershed level. So flooding is getting worse. Heat waves, climate change. Everybody heard about London heat waves last summer? Anybody have connections to London? It's weird. If y'all know someone, find out that your uncle was visiting London or something, everybody complains about the heat waves because they're thought really deadly. The deadliest summer in the history of London was last summer. And the deadliest one before that was the summer before. People are dying because it's too hot. I don't know, I believe you, but I don't know. It's because of this. It's called the urban heat island effect. Cities are much hotter than the forest around them, and we all live in the cities. They're full of like metal and concrete, so the materials heat up more. Plus, cities burn a bunch of energy that makes heat. They don't have evaporation, they don't have shade. So we'll talk about why they heat up in a later unit, but you should understand that with more of us living in cities, we are more susceptible to heat waves. If you live in the country, heat waves suck, but at least there's shade and you can go into a forest which is cooling itself off through evaporation. That same heat wave strikes the city's adding more heat on top of that, and there's no shade and no evaporation, it's much, much hotter. Dang it. We couldn't do drought. Bye, children.